You're not overdramatic. You're not too much. You're allowed to stand up for yourself. You're allowed to have opinions. You're allowed to take up space. Welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm reading an entry from my journal that is a post-dated reflection of one of the big events that I remember happening when I was in an abusive relationship. This was written a few months after it happened. We went for a walk and it started out good. Then we were talking about something and I brought up how something made me feel. I tried to be gentle about it. I tried to pick my words carefully. And he started screaming at me on the street. I was concerned because we were in public, in front of houses in a neighborhood, and you don't know who's around. And I went to separate myself a little bit so that I could walk back on my own, and he got in my way. He would go left and then right and then left and then right to block me and prevent me from leaving or going in the other direction. I remember wanting to test him. At that point, he had never hit me, and I was always curious if he would. So I know I tested him more. I know I made little jabs, especially when I tried to leave, and then he came at me more and blocked my way. I was always curious what he'd do. But instead, I stayed. I stopped trying to leave. I let him yell. I said I was sorry, and we walked back together. I remember on the way back, he was still raising his voice at me, but he was more controlled. And I remember going the other direction again to pull away, and he grabbed me and said, "There's a fucking cop watching. You're gonna make him think that there's something going on." And in that moment, I wished the cop would see something and say something. I just wanted something to happen. But instead, I controlled my reaction. I stayed calm, and I walked by myself down the street for a few minutes before going back home with him. So I want to dive into that whole situation, what happened, what didn't happen. The truth underneath the moment is that I had some hope. There was a cop there. There was somebody watching. But the hope wasn't just because it was a cop. It was that someone, anyone, was witnessing what was happening and could validate it. That somebody could actually witness what I was enduring, because so much of it was behind closed doors. And the secret desire beneath all the layers was that somebody would step in and do something and save me from the pain and end that situation. Because I didn't feel strong enough in the moment to do more about it than what I already was, which was trying to control the situation, trying to de-escalate, and trying to bring peace. And I did that over and over and over again, and no one ever came because I allowed it to not make a scene. And when it was a scene, I didn't ask anybody for help. I remember another instance where we were at a national park and I was getting screamed at in front of hundreds of people, and people just watched. They're onlookers and they're curious and they're judging and they whisper to each other, but they won't jump in. They won't do anything. We were even on a hike at that national park, and he put his hands on me and he was wrestling my phone out from under me, and I was telling him to stop, and people were walking by. Not one person jumped in. And again, there was that same hope of, I hope somebody jumps in. I had this hope as people were walking by. I was like, somebody's gonna say something. And they didn't. And I was baffled, because the truth is nobody comes and nobody's going to. And I think the deeper heartbreak wasn't just the yelling, the belittling, the blocking my way. It was realizing that I was alone in it and that nobody was coming to save me, because I felt so weak and I felt like I would never be able to truly leave. And waiting for a rescue like that is its own form of self-abandonment. You have taught yourself, you have led yourself to believe that you are not coming to save you, that you are not going to do anything about it, whether you're not strong enough, whether you don't believe in yourself, whether you think you can do it, but then you won't follow through. You know your truth. And you have now taught yourself that you are going to be a victim to the circumstance, and this is going to continue to happen until something external changes your situation. There were so many instances that I waited for a hero to come. And one day I finally realized that the only hero I was ever going to find was me. So let's talk about how the shift starts to go from victim to becoming your own hero. How can you do that? Well, it starts with the things that you're telling yourself, the emotions that you have about yourself. And I know it's hard. In the situation that I was in, I was constantly belittled. I was told I was wrong. I was told I was not sensitive to anybody else's needs. I was told I was selfish. I was told I was nothing. I was constantly criticized. And that significantly increased the amount of self-doubt that I had. And so I would do things over time, and I had already been doing this. I would write down what was happening so that I knew the truth. I would know that I don't deserve that. I don't need to tolerate that. I am worth more than that. I started talking to my dad about it and having that little validation of this isn't normal helped a little bit, but it still wasn't enough because I still didn't trust myself that this is the right perspective. I was like, well, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm the biased opinion and I'm telling my dad all of these things, but what if I'm accidentally manipulating him to be on my side and I'm actually the bad guy? And so shifting from being a victim and having that victim mindset, waiting for somebody to come in and do something, starts with shifting how you see yourself, how you see the situation. You have to start teasing apart your trauma ball. And I know it's not easy when you're in it. You have to identify every single time and observe the thoughts, observe the patterns of when am I shrinking? When am I not using my voice? When am I avoiding external conflict and increasing internal conflict just to keep the peace? Because that's not actually keeping the peace. That's creating internal conflict. That's performing to not upset somebody. And it took so many times for me to realize that with all of these people that had ever seen what was going on, not a single person was coming to save me. And despite seeing that pattern time and time again, I still thought somebody would. I still wanted the validation. And I get it if that's where you've been too. But if I can convey anything to you, it's that you are in charge of your life. You are in charge of your decisions. You are in charge of your emotions and the way that you feel about yourself. Nobody can take that from you. You get to decide when somebody's telling you something and you think it's bullshit. You get to decide to stand up for yourself or just to not listen when somebody's telling you that you're disgusting or that you're not worth anything or constantly criticizing you. You get to know that your intentions are good and that you have tried over and over and over again. You are a good person. And it wasn't until after I left that I realized all of that. So some reflections for the listeners that I think are important are, where are you still waiting to be saved? Is it in your relationship? Is it in an unhappy situation at work? Is it in your job? Are you just waiting for somebody to truly see you and change the situation? Because that's self-abandonment. And next, who do you become when you realize that the hero is you? How will that change your life? How will that change the way that you think, the way that you behave, the decisions that you make? How will that change the narrative? Will that change how you respond to people? How you set boundaries? How you stand up for yourself? I hope so. I watched a podcast with a woman who I really respect, and she said, I am peace, love, and light, but I will peace, love, and light your house on fire if you mess with me. And she talks about how that's healing. It's not fake forgiveness and letting everybody walk all over you, because it's creating internal turmoil. You're not loving yourself when you do that. And I fundamentally agree. Some deeper threads to explore in that journal entry, in that story, that experience, or just things to consider, is the unspoken fear of being overdramatic or too much. Where did that begin in my life? Where did I become afraid of being overdramatic or being too much in any situation? What about the internalized conditioning to stay calm, quiet, and pretty, even when you're in pain? Why is that okay? If you had a friend who was going through a really hard time, would you want them to just stay calm, quiet, and pretty? Even though it's tearing them up on the inside, it's slowly killing them? No, because you care about that person. You want them to let you know, I'm in pain. I'm in this situation. I feel these things, so that you can do something to help. So why would you not do that for yourself? The freeze response dressed up as emotional maturity. God, I did this one over and over again. I thought I was being neutral. I thought I was being emotionally mature by not reacting, by not saying what I thought, by not standing up for myself, because I was staying neutral. And I thought neutral was good. I thought neutral was mature. You're allowed to stand up for yourself. You're allowed to set firm boundaries and say, you will not speak to me that way. You're allowed to set firm boundaries and say, you are standing in my way and I need to leave. And when someone doesn't respect that, you are then in your right to do something even bigger about it. One of the other deeper threads was the fantasy that if somebody else called it abuse, it could become real. And that one was hard. I refused to admit to myself that it was abuse, or I thought it was, but I was afraid to say it out loud because I didn't want to be a victim. And because I was like, well, there's no physical proof. He doesn't beat me. We just fight sometimes. You don't have to wait for somebody else to sit there and listen and look at you and say that is abuse for it to be real. You get to decide. And the last thing is the grief. The grief of realizing the rescue will never come because you either have to surrender to being in your situation forever and accepting that that's your fate and that you have no control over it, or you can look inside yourself and let the power rush back to you and realize that it is up to you. You're not overdramatic. You're not too much. You're allowed to stand up for yourself. You're allowed to have opinions. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to take up as much space as you want. You're allowed to have feelings. You're allowed to say, I think that's disrespectful. And you're allowed to make decisions that are your best interest, even when they hurt someone else. I hope this episode was helpful. Let me know in the comments.